Well, for more on the unfolding situation in Afghanistan and Canada's efforts on the ground, we're bringing to the program right now Khan Samander. He's a former Afghan interpreter. He is in Vancouver with us this morning. Mr. Samander, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Michael, for having me. I appreciate that.
I want to begin here with what you're hearing from the ground in Kabul, because to my understanding, you have a friend who actually made it to the airport. But how difficult was it for him to get there?
The current situation for our interpreters and their extended families are a disaster. One of my friends yesterday who made it to the airport, it took him 24 hours just to pass 500-meter distance, 24 hours. Imagine in normal time it will only take you 5 minutes, but it took him 24 hours to get to the airport, because there are thousands of people lined up there.
And once making it to the airport, what have you been told about how interpreters who worked and aided Canadian forces are being treated by those at the airport in charge of security?
Including that friend of mine who is still at the airport, and we have our liaison officer that I have been in contact with him, constantly. Our Canadian military forces, they are willing to help the interpreters and their families, but unfortunately, they are helpless. Why? Because the CIC and the Global Affairs have the involvement. The Global Affairs and CIC are treating this program like just another immigration normal procedure. But we have to understand that it's not the Afghan, especially looking at the current situation in Afghanistan, it's not the normal procedure that we're looking here. We're not doing something like the US and the UK is doing. The US and the UK, their military has more power. There is no involvement of their, like the Global Affairs or the CIC like we have. Even if you make it to the airport, if you do not have a legitimate documents, let's say, for example, I made it to the airport, I have a passport and my wife doesn't have it. The Canadian forces will leave my wife there and take me. But for the US and the UK, it doesn't work that way. If there are 25 people and only one of them have a passport or documents, they will bring all of them, not just only one.
And as you say, you're putting it right now at Global Affairs and CIC, as you say, Canada Immigration Citizenship, for not doing something differently here on the ground. So how frustrating is it for you to hear these stories? How difficult is it for you to hear your friends, your family going through this?
Michael, can you imagine? It's 3:40 in the morning and I'm willing to give that interview sitting in my car. Just want to make sure that my kids do not wake up. It's not only me, but the 800 families, members, the interpreters that are here and living for the last 10 years, and the interpreters that are still in Afghanistan, because they're afraid for their life. There are families, we have these liaison officers, and they have implemented the plan. They say if we give the authorization to the Canadian military and Afghanistan, we can bring thousands of people. But because the Global Affairs and CIC is taking it so slowly that our Canadian military are helpless. Imagine one guy, a young guy, it takes him 24 hours to get to the airport. Now, let's say if I have a family, my family, they will not be able to make it. There are NGOs that are created by our Canadian veterans and in Kabul. There are over hundreds of families. These NGOs already have their information filled up and they're ready to show as soon as the Canadian military have the green light, as soon as they do not have the involvement of the Global Affairs and the CIC.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've used the word family time and again here, and I am wondering about your own family in Afghanistan right now. How are they? How worried are you right now for their safety?
Well, like I said, I'm on the phone with them 24 hours. The moment if I call them and they don't pick up the phone, only God knows what's in my heart if they don't pick up the phone, because they are in these safe houses. I'm so curious, and I'm wondering, what if the U.S., because the U.S. is going to leave in about a week or so, but I know the moment the U.S. Army leaves Afghanistan, our Canadians are not going to stay there. What about those families that have been gathered in these safe houses, which is already surrounded by the Taliban? What's going to happen to them? Well, if we don't bring them by the right time, they'll be slaughtered or be killed. And right now they're at the very critical situation. I was just talking to my dad, one of my nephew, who was very sick, but because they couldn't bring him to the hospital, first of all, they want to keep that safe houses secret from the people. They don't want to make a mess like the mess right now at the airport it's a disaster. Thousands of people are standing there, people with the documents and people not with the documents, just because they heard something on the news and they think they're eligible to go to Canada or America. So it's hard for the people that have the visas or the passport. Mm-hmm. It's heartbreaking, and since the Taliban took over, I have not eaten properly, neither my family in Afghanistan.
We just heard the Prime Minister going into this discussion that you and I are having, saying that everyone is working very hard to get Afghans out of the country right now. What do you make of what you've heard from Justin Trudeau so far? What would you like Canada to do going forward here?
The first thing is the far most important thing is to get rid of the global affairs and the CIC and let the Canadian hero military handle this. That's the first thing. Let the Canadian military handle this like the US Army and the UK Army is doing. They're bringing thousands of people. I was listening to the immigration minister this morning at his conference. What he says is totally the opposite. So far, from my resources, I know that only 200 families have been brought, only 200 been approved. Imagine where the Americans are bringing thousands of them, and we only have so far 200. I think the best way is to get rid of the global affairs and CIC and let the Canadian military handle this. We have our liaison officers there, our friends are there, they're helping. They have the plan. If they have a green light, they have a secret way to the airport, or at least they can do the same thing like the US is doing. What they do is, because there's a lot of people in front of the airport, so what they do is they have these choppers flying over and to designated areas and picking up these eligible families and bringing them back to the airport and boarding them to the aircrafts.
Mm-hmm. Commander, I want to thank you for the time. I really appreciate hearing your words today.
Well, thanks for having me. I hope that the Minister of Immigration and Justin Trudeau is listening to this. And we are, not only me, but the 800 families are in a great pain. And I hope they can do something about it before it's too late.